The wind screamed across the white world. Snow flew like knives in the air, cutting against skin, against breath, against hope. It was not just a storm. It was an ice storm, the kind that came once in many years. The kind that killed without mercy. She pulled her child closer to her chest. Her arms shook, not from weakness, but from the bitter cold pressing against her body. The little one was small, far too small to fight this storm. His breath was shallow, his face pale, and his eyes heavy with fear. She whispered words to him, but her voice was almost stolen by the wind. No one else was there. No one ever came in storms like this. In her world, compassion was rare. People looked away when others suffered. They closed their doors, hid their food, and prayed that death would pass them by. She had grown up this way, seeing her own kind turn their backs on the weak. But now it was her child who was weak, and no one would come. The storm howled louder. The sky was dark, filled with clouds that moved like monsters. Ice shards whipped through the air, slashing at her clothes, at her face. She struggled to move forward, step by step, carrying the weight of her child and the weight of despair. Every step felt like walking into nothing. The ground was hidden under thick snow, and the air was too sharp to breathe. Her feet slipped, her body fell, and she clutched her child tighter, refusing to let go. If they were going to die, they would die together. Her eyes burned from the cold. She could barely see. Shapes of trees twisted in the distance, broken by the storm. There was no shelter, no warmth, no light. The world itself felt like an enemy, pushing her down, pressing her toward death. Her child coughed weakly. The sound tore through her heart like a blade. She held him tighter and cried out into the storm, though she knew no one would hear. The wind swallowed her voice, leaving only silence. She thought of stories she had once heard, long ago. Stories of strangers from the stars, strange creatures called humans. But they were only tales, whispered at night, told to children to make them dream of better things. She had never believed them. She had never seen one. And even if they were real, why would they care for her? Why would anyone care? Still, a part of her heart, a part she had buried long ago, wished it were true. Wished anyone could. Come dot, the storm grew even wilder. The snow turned the world white. The ice made the air sharp like glass. Her legs trembled, and her strength was almost gone. She dropped to her knees, clutching her child. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The child's small hand was cold, so cold it felt lifeless. She shook him gently, calling his name, begging him to stay awake. "Please," she whispered, "please don't leave me." The world answered only with more wind, and then through the storm she saw it. A shadow at first she thought it was. A trick. The storm often played games with the eyes. But this was different. The shadow was moving. It was pushing against the wind, fighting step by step, coming closer. Her heart pounded. Fear shot through her body. Was it an enemy? Another scavenger. Someone who would take her child, her life, and leave her broken in the snow. The shadow grew clearer. A tall figure wrapped in strange clothing, metal glinting faintly under the storm's light. The figure moved with effort, heavy and slow, but with purpose. Her breath caught. This was no one from her world. The figure was too tall, the walk too heavy, the shape too strange. It was something else, something she had only heard of in stories. A human. She froze in disbelief. Her mind screamed at her that this could not be real. Humans were myths, dreams, but there, in the storm, one was walking toward her. The child stirred weakly in her arms, as if sensing the same presence. The figure came closer, and through the veil of snow, she saw a face. The skin was different, the eyes sharp, the jaw strong. The breath came out in clouds of steam, but the eyes were alive, burning with something she had never seen before. Compassion. The human's eyes locked on hers, then shifted to the small, frail child in her arms. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The storm still raged, but she could hear her own heart beat louder than the wind. The human pushed forward, one step, then another, until he stood before her. She wanted to run, to protect her child, to hide. But she could not move. The human looked, down at the child, then at her. Slowly, he reached out a hand, offering not violence, not theft, but help. Her breath shook. She had never seen such a thing. No one in her world had ever reached out like this, and in that moment, as the storm roared around them, she felt something strange. Not fear, not despair, but a small spark of hope. The human spoke, his voice calm, steady, and warm despite the cold. She could not understand all his words, but she understood his meaning. He had come to save them. The storm screamed, but she no longer heard only the wind. She heard the sound of heavy steps pressing into the snow. The shadow she had seen now stood before her, tall and strange, like anything her eyes had ever known. The figure bent down slowly, careful not to frighten her. Snow clung to his shoulders, ice dripped from the metal pieces of his suit. His face was covered by a glass shield, glowing faintly from the inside. Through the mist of his breath, she saw his eyes again sharp, steady, and alive. Her body shook. She held her child tighter, pulling him close to her chest. In her world, strangers never meant safety. Strangers meant danger, hunger, betrayal. She had learned this all her life, but something in those eyes was different. The human raised one hand, not fast, not sudden, slowly, carefully, as if he knew she might run. In that hand was a strange object. It glowed faint orange, and warm air rose from it, fighting the cold. She felt the heat on her face, small but real, and her heart raced with shock. Warmth. He carried warmth. She looked at her child. His tiny lips were blue, his breath weak. The storm was eating him alive. She knew the warmth could save him. But could she trust the figure? The human knelt in the snow. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came, muffled through the mask, but strong. You need help. The words were not hers, but she understood the tone. It was not a command. It was not a threat. It was an offer. To her arms trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to scream, to shout at him to leave, but the storm stole her voice. All she could do was look back at him, torn between fear and hope. The human's eyes moved again to the child. His hand trembled slightly, not from cold, but from urgency. He pushed the glowing object toward her. It looked like a box, but strange, smooth, with symbols she could not read. Warmth poured from it like invisible fire. The child stirred weakly when the heat touched him. His tiny chest rose, his body no longer stiff. A small sound escaped his lips, soft, fragile, but alive. Her heart stopped. For the first time since the storm began, she felt something change. Her child was not slipping away. He was coming back. Her eyes lifted to the human. He had given this warmth without asking, without taking. She could not understand why. No one did this. No one gave without wanting something in return. She whispered, voice broken, "Why?" The human tilted his head, as if he heard but did not fully understand. His eyes softened. He spoke again, slowly, because he is a child, and children must live. She froze. Her people never said such words. Children were often left to the storm, to hunger, to fate. But this human, this stranger, spoke as if it was truth, as if it was law. The storm roared again, stronger, as if angry at their defiance. Snow crashed against them. Ice broke from branches. The ground shook under the frozen wind. The human looked up at the sky, then back at her. He reached forward suddenly, but not to harm her. His gloved hand pressed against her shoulder, steady and strong. He pointed to the horizon, where the storm clouds shifted and faint shapes of stone rose. From the white dot shelter, her breath caught. He wanted to take them there, but doubt filled her chest. Could she trust him? Could she place her life and her child's life into the hands of something she barely believed was real? Her mind screamed, no. Her heart whispered yes. The child coughed again, a weak, painful sound that shattered her indecision. She could not save him alone. Her strength was fading, her body numb. If she stayed here, death would claim them both. Slowly, with trembling arms, she loosened her grip. She let the human place the warm device over her child. She let him lift the boy gently, his hands careful, protective, almost tender. She staggered to her feet, still clutching the human's arm for balance. He carried her child as though he was his own, shielding him from the storm with his body. Together, they began to move toward the dark shapes in the distance. Each step was a battle. The storm pushed, the snow blinded, the ice cut at their skin. But the human never slowed, never faltered. She watched him through the blur of snow, and her fear slowly twisted into something she had never known. Could it be? Trust. The storm wailed behind them like a beast denied its prey. The human held. The child closed, his eyes fixed on the shelter ahead. She followed, weak but determined, her heart beating with a strange new rhythm. And in that moment, as they walked into the unknown, she realized something shocking. This was not just survival. This was the beginning of something greater. For the first time in her life, she wondered if compassion could be real. The cave entrance was not far, but the storm made every step feel endless. The wind pushed like an enemy with invisible hands. The snow rose high, covering the human's boots, dragging him down. Still, he carried the child, one arm strung around the small body, while the other held his strange glowing tool to fight the cold. The alien mother stumbled behind him. Her strength was fading, but she refused to fall. Her child's weak breaths kept her moving. She knew if she collapsed now, the storm would claim them forever. Finally, the cave opened before them, a black mouth in the white wall of snow. The human pushed through, bending low, and guided them inside. The wind screamed at the entrance, but could not follow them deeper. Darkness swallowed them. Inside, it was silent. Silent, but freezing. The human placed the child gently on the ground, then pulled another device from his pack. He pressed a button, and a small flame burst alive inside a clear container. Light filled the cave, soft and golden, chasing away the shadows. The alien mother gasped. Fire was rare in her world and never so controlled. The human set the fire device on the ground. Slowly, the cave warmed. The ice on their clothes began to melt. For the first time since the storm began, she could breathe. Without pain, but her child still lay silent. His face was pale, his lips blue. His chest rose and fell, but barely her heart broke. She dropped to her knees, clutching the boy's hand, whispering his name again and again. Tears froze on her cheeks. She had fought so hard, but was it enough? Was she about to lose him here, in this dark place, even after all she had endured? The human moved quickly. He pulled off one glove and pressed his warm hand against the boy's chest. He shook his head sharply, as if refusing to let the child go. Then, without hesitation, he opened his pack and took out another strange object. It was a mask, connected to a tube. He placed it over the boy's face. A soft hiss filled the cave. The boy's chest rose slightly, then fell. The human pressed his hand harder, steady, firm, almost commanding life to return. The alien mother stared, breathless. She had never seen such things. In her world, when life began to fade, people turned away. They whispered, "It is fate." But this human, this stranger, was fighting fate itself. Minutes felt like hours. The storm outside pounded the cave walls, shaking the earth. But all she could hear was the hiss of the device and the pounding of her own heart. Then suddenly, the boy coughed. It was a small sound, weak and broken, but it cut through the silence, like lightning. His tiny body shivered, his chest lifted, and color returned faintly to his skin. His eyes fluttered open, just for a moment. The alien mother cried out in shock. She grabbed him, holding him close, pressing her forehead to his. He was alive, alive. The human sat back, his chest rising and falling with relief. His eyes softened, and for the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. The mother looked at him through tears. Words failed her. No one had ever done this for her child. No one had ever fought so hard, given so much, for nothing in return. Her people never showed such mercy. But this human had risked everything to save a child who was not his. She whispered, her voice trembling. "Why? Why would you save him? He is not yours." The human looked at her, his eyes calm, steady. He touched his chest with one hand, then pointed at the boy. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with fire. "Because life matters. Every life." The words struck her like thunder. She stared at him, unable to breathe. On her world, survival was cold. Compassion was weakness. Yet here was a being from another star, showing her that kindness was strength. The child stirred again, breathing deeper now, leaning into the warmth of the human's device. His small hand reached out weakly and grasped the human's finger. The human froze, staring down at the child's hand. Then he curled his finger gently, letting the boy hold on. The alien mother's heart swelled. It was not just survival anymore. It was something greater, something she had no name for. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cave, something stronger had begun to grow. Hope. The fire glowed inside the cave, pushing back the dark. The storm's scream was distant now, muffled by stone walls. Drops of melted ice ran down the rocks, and the ground steamed faintly in the new warmth. The alien mother sat near her child, who now slept, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. She brushed his hair with shaking fingers, her tears drying at last. He was alive. Against the storm, against death, he was alive. But her eyes kept returning to the stranger. The human sat a short distance away, removing pieces of his heavy suit. The strange fabric peeled back layer by layer, releasing more heat. His chest rose with deep breaths, strong but tired. His face, now uncovered, was sharp, different from her people, yet not frightening. She stared at him with suspicion and wonder. Every move he made was careful, deliberate, as if he understood she watched him like a cornered animal. He opened a small metal box and pulled out items she did not recognize. A flat circle that glowed with light, a thin stick that bent and burned. At one end, a packet of strange food, sealed and neat. He worked silently, his hands precise. It was not clumsy magic. It was knowledge, skill, habit. She thought of her people. When storms came, they hid. They saved themselves. They left the weak behind. That was the way of survival. But this man, this human, had run into the storm for a child that was not his. Why? Her voice was soft, broken, but she forced the words out. "You could have left us." The human looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He tilted his head, as if trying to understand her meaning. Then he shook his head firmly. No, could not. She blinked. His words were rough, not her language, yet she understood. His tone carried. No doubt he picked up one of the sticks and touched it to the fire. The tip burned bright. He held it out carefully, offering it to her. She pulled back at first. Fire was dangerous. Fire was life, but also death. She had seen it destroy homes in the dry season. But when the warmth touched her fingers, she froze. It was not wildfire. It was controlled. She wrapped her hand around the stick. Heat filled her palm, gentle, alive. She gasped softly. The human smiled faintly. Her chest tightened. No one smiled at her like that. In her world, smiles were rare, and never for her. She looked away quickly, ashamed of her own feelings. But her thoughts returned to one truth. He had saved her child when her own people would not have lifted a hand. The child stirred in his sleep, whimpering softly. The mother leaned close, whispering comfort. But before she could rise to fetch more warmth, the human was already moving. He placed another glowing device near the boy, adjusting its setting, making the air gentler. The mother's throat tightened again. He treated the boy as if he mattered, as if every life mattered. She whispered without meaning to, compassion. The human's head lifted. His eyes searched her face. Compassion. He repeated, the word shaped carefully on his tongue. She nodded slowly, though the word felt foreign, heavy, almost forbidden. In her language, there was no perfect translation. But somehow, she knew he understood. For a long time, silence filled the cave. The fire crackled. The storm howled outside. Finally, she asked the question that burned in her heart. Why risk your life? For us, you do not know us. The human's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with memory. He pressed his hand against his chest, then pointed upward, toward the sky hidden by stone. His voice was low, heavy with meaning, because someone once saved me. Her breath caught. She wanted to ask more, but she saw in his eyes a story too deep for this night, too heavy for words. Instead, she lowered her gaze to her child. She realized something terrifying and beautiful. Her world had always been cruel, but maybe the universe was not. Maybe there were people beings who carried fire in their hearts, not just in their hands. The human stood suddenly and moved toward the cave entrance. Snow blew inside, sharp and white. He peered out into the storm, scanning the endless dark. His posture was alert, watchful. The mother's fear returned. Was something else out there? Another danger. Another enemy. The human turned back, his eyes meeting hers again. He lifted a hand, palm open, a silent promise of protection. Then he returned to the fire, calm and steady. She realized then the cave was no longer just stone. It was shelter. It was safety. It was the first place she had ever felt trust. Her child sighed in sleep, the sounds soft and peaceful. The human leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed but still alert, and she, for the first time in her life, allowed herself to believe. Maybe survival was not meant to be lonely. Maybe, in the firelight of compassion, a new path could begin. The storm outside still howled, but inside the cave, there was fire, warmth, and breath. The child slept peacefully now, his chest rising with strength instead of weakness. Every sound of his breathing was like music to the mother's ears. She sat close, watching him, but her eyes kept drifting toward the human. He was different. Not only in shape, not only in face, but in the way he moved. He did not act like a creature of this frozen world. He carried himself with quiet strength, as if he carried not just his body, but also a purpose. He sat by the fire, cleaning his strange tools. Metal shone under the flame. Glass glimmered. Small lights blinked on his devices, like stars caught in a box. He handled each with care, not greed, not fear. The mother finally broke the silence. Her voice was low, uncertain. You are not from here." The human looked up. His eyes softened. He nodded once. Then, slowly, he pointed upward again, toward the roof of the cave, toward the sky hidden by storm and stone. From far, he said the word was simple, but it carried weight. She shivered. She remembered the old stories tales whispered in the dark, about beings who crossed the stars, who brought fire and hope. She had always believed those stories were lies. Now one sat before her, breathing, alive. Her people had no word for kindness. They had no place for mercy. Survival meant strength, and weakness was punished. She thought of her own childhood cold nights, empty stomachs, hands that refused to help. She thought of the cruel eyes of her own kind, eyes that looked away when she begged for food, and then she thought of this man, this human who had walked into death for her child. Her heart twisted. The words she had spoken earlier, compassion burned. In her mind, she turned toward him, her voice breaking. Why help? My people. We do not help. We survive, that is all. Why are you different? The human's gaze did not waver. He leaned forward, resting his hand on the ground between them. His voice was calm, but each word struck like fire, because, alone, we fall. Together, we rise. She blinked, stunned. The idea was strange, almost impossible. In her world, together meant competition, betrayal, hunger. But here he was, speaking of rising, not through strength, but through unity. The human lifted one of his tools, a small square that glowed with light. He pressed it, and moving images appeared. She gasped, her body stiffening. She saw pictures. Children running under a bright sun, people building together, carrying stones side by side, arms lifting one another when they fell, faces smiling not with cruelty, but with joy. Her heart raced. She had never seen such things. The human turned the device so she could see clearly. He pointed at the images, then at himself, then at her child. His voice was soft, but steady. This is human. We fight storms, we fight hunger, but we do not fight alone. Her breath shook. Her mind tried to resist, to call it a trick, a lie. But her heart began to believe. Her eyes filled with tears, but not from despair this time, from something she had never felt before. A weight lifted, as if the storm outside was also inside her. And now the fire of his words burned it away. She looked at her child. He had been saved not by strength, not by cruelty, but by compassion, a value her people had never known. Slowly she whispered, almost to herself, maybe we are the weak ones. Not you. The human tilted his head as if trying to understand her pain. Then he leaned forward and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. His eyes were steady, filled with something deeper than words. Not weak, he said softly. Just waiting. She froze. Waiting. For what? For someone to show them another way. The fire cracked between them. The storm roared outside, but inside the cave, something new was born. Not just survival, not just safety, understanding. Her child shifted in sleep, reaching out a small hand. The human reached back, letting the tiny fingers curl around his own. The mother watched, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. Her people had never shown her such things. But now, sitting in the glow of a fire brought by a stranger from the stars, compassion was strength. And maybe, just maybe, it could change everything. The cave had become a fragile world of its own warmth, fire, and breath against the storm outside. But safety never lasted long on this frozen planet. The child stirred and whimpered in his sleep. The mother leaned close, whispering soft comfort, while the human checked his devices once more. His eyes moved often to the cave walls, as if he did not trust them. A sound echoed through the stone. A deep, low crack. The mother froze. She had heard that sound before. It was the voice of ice, warning of collapse. Her heart tightened. Clutched her child, the human's eyes narrowed. He stood quickly, moving to the cave entrance. He pressed his hand against the wall, listening. The crack came again, louder, sharper. Then another and another, until the cave shook under their feet. The mother gasped. The storm outside had grown angrier, its winds tearing at the mountain itself. The cave was no longer safe. It was a trap. The human turned to her, his face tense, but calm. He pointed to the far side of the cave, where a narrow tunnel disappeared into darkness. He spoke firmly. "Go, take him." Her blood went cold. She shook her head. "No, it is too small, too dark." But the human's eyes were steady. He'd already chosen. The ceiling shook violently, and shards of ice crashed down, splintering like glass. The child woke and cried, his voice thin and afraid. The mother covered him with her body, but she knew it was not enough. The human ran to them, pulling the child gently but firmly from her arms. His movements were strong, protective, urgent. He pressed the boy back into her arms and guided her toward the tunnel. She stumbled, terrified. The tunnel was narrow, cold, and unknown, but the cave was breaking. She had no choice. They entered the tunnel, the human behind them, pushing them forward. The walls squeezed close. The air grew tight, and the child's cries echoed like ghosts. Then, the ground roared. A piece of the ceiling collapsed, cutting the tunnel in two. Ice and stone fell between them. The mother screamed. The human was on the other side, separated by a wall of frozen rubble. She saw his face through the cracked snow dust covering his skin, his eyes fierce and alive. "No," she cried, clutching her child. "You will die." The human pressed, his hand against the ice as if to calm her. His lips moved, and though his words were faint, she understood. "Keep going. Protect him." Her tears burned hot against her cold face. She shook her head wildly. "Not without you." But the human was already moving. He pressed his body against the unstable ice, bracing it with his strength. His arms strained, his breath heavy. He was holding the collapse back using his body. As the mother's heart tore. This was madness. Why would he give his life for them? The storm outside howled, and the ice cracked louder, hungrier. The human's voice broke through the chaos, strong and sharp. "Go." Her child whimpered in her arms. His tiny hand reached through the crack, reaching for the human. The man's finger touched his for one brief moment, then pushed it gently back. The mother's chest shattered. Her legs trembled. But then she remembered the words he had spoken in the firelight. "Because, alone, we fall. Together, we rise." Her body shook with new strength. She would not abandon him. Not now, not after he had shown her what compassion meant. She pressed her child into the narrow path behind her, securing him between two stones where he would be safe for a moment. Then she turned back. The human's eyes widened as he saw her climbing toward the collapse. She pushed her hands against the ice beside him, bracing it with her own body. Her voice shook, but was strong, not alone, together. For a moment, the storm seemed to pause. The human stared at her, surprise flickering into something deep respect, even pride. The two of them pushed with all their strength. Ice cracked, stone groaned. The cave screamed like a dying beast. The world itself seemed determined to crush them, but together. They held. The child cried from the tunnel, his voice echoing in the dark, pulling them forward. The mother and the human looked at each other through the storm of breaking stone. They nodded once, united without words. Then, with a final push, they forced open a narrow gap. Light spilled in dim, gray, but free. The mother grabbed her child and pulled him through. She turned back and reached for the human. For one terrifying second, she thought he would not follow. Then his hand caught hers. Strong, warm, alive. She pulled with every ounce of her strength. He pushed with his, and together they escaped as the cave behind them collapsed in thunder and ice. They fell into the snow, gasping, broken, but alive. The storm screamed above them, furious at its failure. The mother clutched her child, safe, in her arms, then looked at the human. He lay on the ground, chest rising and falling, exhausted but alive. Her tears fell again, but this time they were not of despair. They were of something new. Trust. The storm had tested them, and together they had passed. The storm was still alive outside, but weaker now, like a beast that had lost its hunger. Snow still swirled. The wind still screamed. Yet the air felt lighter. The alien mother sat in the open snow, her child pressed close to her chest. His breathing was steady, soft, alive. She kissed his forehead again and again, her tears warm against his skin. He had survived. No, they had survived. Beside her, the human lay on the ground, chest heaving from exhaustion. His face was pale, his lips cracked from the cold, but his eyes still burned with life. She stared at him for a long time. Every part of her wanted to speak, but her words felt too small. What could she say to someone who had given so much? The human sat up slowly, his breath forming clouds in the air. He looked at her child, then at her. His face softened. The mother's voice shook. Why? Why risk yourself? Again and again. The human was silent for a moment. Then he lifted his hand, pointing first to her child, then to her, and finally to himself. His voice was weak, but steady, because we are not so different. Her heart stopped, not different. She wanted to argue, to remind him that her people had no mercy, no kindness. But then she remembered the fire, the warmth, the way he had refused to let her child die. Not so different. She looked at her son. His small hand reached again, grasping weakly at the air until the human offered his finger. The child held on tightly, refusing to let go. The mother's chest ached. She had never believed in hope, but now hope was breathing right in front of her. The storm began to clear. Clouds tore open, and for the first time in days, light broke. Through, it was pale and cold, but it was light. Snow crystals glittered like tiny stars across the ground. The human stood slowly, swaying but firm. He extended his hand toward her. She hesitated, her old fear whispering in her mind. But then she looked at her child. The choice became clear. She placed her hand in his. It was strong, rough from battle, but warm. For the first time in her life, she felt safety in another's touch. The human pulled her gently to her feet. Together, they began to walk through the snow. The world was still frozen, still cruel. But it no longer felt empty. As they walked, she whispered softly, almost afraid of her own words, "My people, they will not understand this." The human's eyes met hers. His voice was quiet, but filled with conviction. Then, show them. Her breath caught. Could she? Could she take this fire of compassion and carry it back to her kind? Could she change what had always been? She looked at her child again. His small eyes, though tired, were full of wonder as they stared at the human. The boy had seen compassion first, before anyone else of their kind. Perhaps that was the beginning. The mother tightened her grip on the human's hand. "Yes," she whispered, "I will show them." The wind eased. The snow fell softer now, drifting gently to the ground. The storm had lost its power. They walked together across the frozen plain, the alien mother, her child, and the brave human who had changed everything. Behind them, the cave lay buried, swallowed by ice. Ahead of them stretched a vast, endless land. Dangerous? Yes, but no longer hopeless. The mother raised her eyes to the horizon. For the first time in her life, she did not see only survival. She saw a possibility. She saw a path. And in her heart, a flame burned. A flame not of fire, not of heat, but of compassion. It was small, fragile, but alive. She knew it could spread. She turned to the human, her voice steady, her fear gone. "You did not just save my child. You saved me." The human's lips curved into the faintest smile. He looked ahead, toward the rising light. Together, they walked forward toward a future neither of them had known, but both of them had just begun to believe in. On a world of ice and storms, compassion had been born, and compassion would change everything.